Thank you. I'm delighted to be at an event where this horrific trade in women's bodies and women's body parts is being seen as a negative and as a human rights abuse that we need to challenge. And my work, mainly as a journalist and as a feminist activist, is to work against the commercial sex trade. But the connections, as we've heard already on this panel, between selling women's bodies, body parts, the renting of wombs, the renting of orifices, are so connected that it is difficult as a feminist campaigner against prostitution and the abuses inherent to the sex trade to not involve ourselves, in fighting this particular atrocity. And recently I visited Gujarat in India. We've already heard an excellent presentation about surrogacy in India, so I won't go into too much detail about that here today. But I was there undercover as a journalist, posing as a woman who wished to hire a surrogate. The law had just changed. The Indian government had, at the end of October, just 10 days before I arrived in Gujarat, written to all of the clinics, all of the fertility clinics across the country to say that it was no longer possible, it was no longer legal, in fact, to offer surrogacy services to anyone who wasn't an Indian passport holder resident. They had already, the government had clamped down by making it illegal to provide such services to same-sex couples, to gay male couples, and to single people, which wouldn't have helped in any way at all to curtail the industry in the way that we wish to see it. I don't want anybody to access surrogacy services. And it was quite telling that the majority of those seeking surrogacy services and egg donation services were heterosexual couples, and they had not been targeted at all. So now it has been decided that no foreigners can access such services, and the clinics are all getting together. There's an organisation, which I've conveniently forgotten the name of, which is like a union of fertility clinics in India that are putting together funding to challenge the Indian government in court when it gets onto the statute in February. But in the meantime, they took my money for a consultation and were quite happy to talk to me about the possibility of me perhaps having a baby through a friend I had taken who is of Indian origin, who said that she was the sister of my husband and that we don't live in India, but perhaps she herself could have the baby be the commissioning parent, or perhaps, there's a way around it. And they were very happy to discuss this and to consider this with me. I was deeply disturbed at what I saw, the practices from the clinicians. I didn't go to Gujarat to speak to the surrogate women. I wanted to talk to those who directly profited from those women. I was told repeatedly at the clinics I visited that the women would not be sent to what one clinician called a colony, meaning a surrogacy home, for the duration of her pregnancy, because it was very bad for her mental health to be away from her husband. When I said, but I really would like the surrogate to be monitored, she said, of course, you'll have to pay though. So having admitted that this is bad for the woman's mental health, she then said if I paid, she would do that. I asked if she could reassure me, the doctor, that the women were not coerced into becoming surrogate mothers in the way that many women in prostitution are. She said, no, of course not. We never allow the woman to become a surrogate unless we have the permission of her husband. Which was quite a leap of logic. I asked another doctor if there was much domestic violence towards the surrogate mothers as they were during their pregnancy, And this doctor shook her head, affecting a sad pose, and said, yes, there is. One woman, for example, one of our surrogates, she was being beaten by her husband. She came to us for help. So we put her in the room upstairs, and she had her baby, and then we sent her home. Of course, as we know, with egg donors, the eggs of white women are worth more than the eggs of Indian women, because this is a business built on racism and colonialism. But I was told that although it's very rare for a white commissioning parent to want the egg of an Indian woman, which is worth about a quarter as much, there was one woman who'd chosen an Indian egg donor. And when I asked why, perhaps her husband was Indian, she said she wanted a baby with black hair. So this is obviously about designer babies and eugenics. We are very clear that homophobia has no place in the anti-surrogacy movement, and I will not ever renege on that principle. But there are particular misogynistic practices developing, with the gay market being targeted, and with some gay men, rich white gay men in the main, thinking that they are entitled to use women's bodies in whatever way they wish. There's one couple, a gay male couple in the UK, the Druitt Barlows, who have 5 children through surrogacy. They've spent an absolute fortune on buying these children. One of the men said, "You get what you pay for," when he was told that one of his children was very handsome. So the children are seen as commodities, not just the women whose wombs they use. And one of the most disturbing things I've heard from the so-called commissioning parents was when this particular man told me that he insisted upon a caesarean birth with all of his children's births. And I assumed, as we'd heard from our colleague earlier, that this was something to do with health. I mean, it's horrific, but I assumed that. And they told me it was because they didn't want any of their children coming into contact with a woman's vagina, because they found that so disgusting. Now, in the UK, commercial surrogacy is illegal, but there is a creeping acceptance of higher and higher fake expenses being paid to the surrogate mothers. And the law is not being implemented. And you can see the way that the regulators are thinking about compensation for egg donors, because they recognise that the health risks are quite significant. And certainly a blind eye has been turned to women who are being paid commercially to bear children this way. There's a case in the British press that I'm sure you can find very easily on Google, of a couple called the Cutters, and they hired a surrogate, this is in Scotland, in the UK, to have their baby. They were unable to have their own child through the traditional way. And this woman has just been convicted of fraud and will very likely go to prison. What she did was terrible. She faked a pregnancy, sent the couple fake scans from the hospital, and then when the baby was due to be born, she lied and said that it had been killed in a car crash. The woman was paid £8,000 by this couple. She, of course, has been described as evil and monstrous, terrible in the press. The couple are seen as a tragic victim, martyred almost. All they wanted was their own child, and this evil woman lied to them and took their money. Nobody is investigating why they broke the law, because this is commercial surrogacy. Every bit of the sympathy, of course, is towards this couple. Nobody's questioning anything about the practice of surrogacy. These people are entitled, and this evil woman then just didn't fulfill her contract. So we already have legal commercial surrogacy by default. The arguments that the neoliberals use to defend surrogacy are almost exactly the same as the arguments that they use to defend the sex trade. It's all about choice. It's all about agency. How can the women make so much money doing anything else? The women enjoy it. It's a great thing to do. It's altruistic. All of the same arguments. And bearing in mind that parallel, we can see that legalization of the sex trade in countries where they have experimented with it, such as the Netherlands, Germany, Nevada in the US, some states in Australia, has been an unmitigated disaster, where all it does to legalise this trade is to encourage the illegal markets that creep up behind it. The same will happen with surrogacy. We cannot possibly accept regulation. We have to look to abolition of surrogacy. Thank you.